Right. Let's share screen. Okay. All right. So if I remember correctly, this is where we left off last Thursday, talking about the seeking safety model. And what we're going to get into today, and I'll probably run into Thursday, is we're going to start talking about the group process. If you remember, we kind of started talking about some of the responsibilities of the therapist and the therapist process. And we spent quite a bit of time talking about this idea of countertransference and how, while it is a useful tool, if it's used consciously and the therapist is very aware of the transference going on, it can lead to some unethical and unnecessary and untherapeutic behaviors. So that's kind of where we left off um, in our conversation on Thursday. Okay. As we get into the treatment format, the thing that I do want to focus on are a couple things. One is that the treatment does primarily focus on safety. If you haven't guessed that by now, as we've gone through this, and the idea is to provide a safe and consistent environment for a person who has gone through trauma. Okay, and so one way to make sure that the treatment process is a safe place is to create consistency and predictability. Okay. And so when we look at the format of the seeking safety model, it is set. Okay. Each week follows these 7 steps. Well, 6 steps uh, and the 7th step is kind of an optional one. It's usually left up to your organization or to you as a therapist. But I should say at least these first 6 steps are done each and every time. And what that does for someone who is going through trauma is some of the things we seek out as just some kind of basic human needs is for our world to be predictable and to be consistent. And when we can find that kind of environment, then that's where we feel safe and we're able to explore what's going on in our world in a more less guarded way, in a less suspicious way, if you want to think about it that way. Okay. So we'll go through each one of these, but basically, the first thing is to do a check-in. This is finding out how the client is doing, how their week was, and we'll go through this in more detail here in a minute. And then usually the next step is to do some type of quote that ties sometimes it's a poem, just a quotation of some famous person or something that is meant to engage the person into thinking about the session itself or the material that you're about to go over. Okay. And then you go into a session topic. This is kind of the psychoeducational part of the session where you're going to connect that week's topic. Remember that for seeking safety, there's 25 topics. You're going to kind of give again a quick lesson on it. Not You don't make it very classroomish, but you facilitate a topic. Um, and during this process, you make sure that the clients, it's weird that they call them patients in the slide, but the clients have some kind of meaningful connection with that topic. And that's really usually why you start with a quotation, is the person, they kind of give their own substance to it. Okay. And then you go into some kind of a group, kind of put it as an activity. So this is where You have the group members do some type of role play. Maybe they work through some type of coping worksheet together. You have them practice different conversations, as you would say, different relapse techniques, different thought stoppers, those kind of things that are related to the topic for that day. Then the fifth thing you do is you do a commitment sheet. So you've gone through, you've made that personal connection to the topic for that day. You practice those topics. And now what you're looking for as the therapist is everyone to make some type of commitment to practicing the technique, to implementing the technique. And this can be just simply anywhere from a client saying, I'm going to practice this every day, or even if you can get a client to commit to just reviewing the material and thinking about it. So it can be, the commitment sheet can be anywhere from I'm going to review it some more and kind of consider it to fully implementing it. Okay. And then the sixth step is a checkout, which is to reinforce patients' progress and give therapists feedback. So this is where you go in and you basically are going to ask the clients, you know, what did they learn during the session? What are they going to take away from this? And then again, this one is dependent upon the organization. Sometimes you might have a feedback form for that session so that you know kind of where you need to head into the next one. So very formalized, but what I'm hoping you see is in each of these, it ties both to the group community, but also tries to make the information personal to the individual. And that's kind of the idea behind it. So let's go in and look at some of the type of check-ins that we can look at. So a check-in is basically asking, how are you feeling? What good copings have you done? Any substance use or unsafe behaviors? When I did this group, I would actually let the clients or for complete a commitment, or did you do a resource? In my opinion, there's two ways you can approach this. You can go through and say, for the check-in today, I want you to tell me about whether you completed your commitment from last week or where you are on that. Or you can simply ask, hey, for check-in this week, let's check in how everyone's feeling, how everyone's doing. When I've seen this group done both on my end and on supervising other therapists, we always gave the option to do any of these 5 check-ins. So a client could simply either say how they're feeling, or they could say, you know, this week I'm really proud of myself because I kept my commitment from last week. And for some, it really was that they were struggling because they went into some type of unsafe behaviors, or maybe they had a relapse and they needed to process it. Okay. Now, the key to a check-in, though, and this is the difficult part, is that you have to make sure that you've done the job of creating the group cohesion. Okay. Because if you think about this, if you don't have a strong group where there's development of trust and the feeling of support and empathy, every time you have your clients come in, they're just going to do number one. They're going to say, I feel good. I'm having a good week. Yeah, next. Okay. So these check-ins can serve 2 purposes. One, to allow your clients to kind of talk about the things that they want to talk about, whether it's getting a community resource, completing a commitment, how maybe they did a really good coping that led them not to do a relapse and whatnot. Okay. Um, but it allows you to gauge where the group is in that. You remember from the beginning of the semester, the norming, storming, you can tell kind of where everyone is at by how they use these check-ins. Okay. So then we're going to jump to the checkouts. So we start check-in and then we fill in and then we do checkouts. And so in this one, we actually have them kind of say all three of these. Okay. So when you do a check-in, you say, hey, how are you feeling? But hey, is there a good coping? Any substance use? Complete your commit and have them kind of update on the rest of these. For your checkout, you want them to do all three. So name one thing you got from today's session and any problems with the session, and always include that. What is your new commitment based on what we went through this week? And what community resources will you call this week to get some assistance or get some help, or what do you need to do? Now remember, this is that case management part, because sometimes the clients will say, well, I don't know what resources I need sometimes, or they might think that they don't need any resources, which is very plausible. Or they just may not know where to get it. So this is your opportunity then to kind of refer them back to the team members, the social workers and case managers, and say, well, discuss this with your case manager. Or you could ask the other group members, does anyone else have any suggestions on where Bill can go for interviewing skills or something like that. Okay. I pulled that one out of the hat. Okay. All right. So this is kind of the process. All right. And again, the idea behind having this structure is, especially for people who go through trauma, is to create a consistent and predictable environment. Okay. And then when we get to the core concepts of treatment, hold on just a second. Okay. So just really quickly, just to kind of go through, I'm going to skip this one. You can read it on your own if you want to, fewer sessions. But I just wanted to kind of show some of the topics that are used within the treatment modality, just to kind of give everyone a flavor of some of the topics and groups that will go in. So each one of these is a group session. And I believe Seeking Safety has 25 formal sessions. Okay. And so when you get into the sessions, you obviously start with an introduction to treatment. You get to know your clients, assess case management needs. So you're doing that. What is that first part of the group process? You're getting them to connect with each other, connect with the treatment model, get to know each other, create that I'm not here alone situations. Okay. And then the next thing we want to do is look at how the client explores what safety means to them. Okay. And in the model, they list about 80 plus safe coping skills. Okay. That lead to, when a person is in a high risk situation, 80 different ways that they could approach dealing with that high risk situation, excuse me. And so, because again, you'll notice we didn't go right into PTSD and substance abuse, because the idea behind seeking safety is priority. That if we can keep ourselves safe, and we're in a predictable, consistent environment, then we can do the healing of the post-traumatic stress and the substance use. So it's creating this environment where healing can start, okay? And then we get into what is PTSD. We give the links to substance use. And this one is where you're going to use a lot of compassion to take back power, okay? If you want to replace this word with compassion, I would replace it with empathy. I would replace it with the emotional intelligence section that we went over during the semester. But this is where you're allowing the person to take power over and understanding their post-traumatic stress and their substance use. The goal of this is to start to make it so the individual doesn't feel like they're a slave to their trauma and to their substance use. Okay. Now, it it doesn't happen overnight. And this is something, it seems very simple when you see it on a list right here. The taking back the power can take almost all 25 sessions. And sometimes individuals can leave a group like this, even if they're fully committed, not feeling like they have full power yet. Okay. But this is the starting of that process. Okay. And then we get into what's called a grounding technique. Um, and this is where we teach things like muscle relaxation techniques. We teach how to soothe oneself, how to physically take control of over emotional pain. The idea about grounding is it's to teach a technique that works for an individual, that allows them, when they're starting to feel a lot of emotional pain and rage and hurt, that they can take a moment, they can do some technique and bring themselves back into the moment. Probably the most popular grounding technique used today is the mindfulness techniques, where you have the person breathe, and if their thoughts start to go into the future or the past, you have them stop and bring it back to the present, or you have them focus on some object in the room, where if their mind stops going away from that object, they have to bring it back to the object. Some type of process to bring the person back into the moment. That's probably the best example of a grounding technique that is used today. And then we get into a discussion about when substance use controls you. And this gets into kind of a conversation. There's some worksheets that are done about how and when do we feel out of control because of our substance use. I see a hand up. What's that?
Hi, I just wanted to ask if you could um go over again real quick the grounding.
Sure. So grounding techniques are kind of how should I put this? So grounding is when you're trying to bring your client to where, once they start feeling emotional pain, when they're starting to feel, for example, we can take a PTSD example, right? We could look at when someone triggers to some trauma, right? And they're starting to feel the feelings of that trauma that happened to them. This is when you would have the person stop, and you would have them do some type of grounding technique. There's a couple, like I said, the main one that um, uh, Yes, Anita, uses their senses to really put them back into space. And as I mentioned, the main one that is used today is mindfulness techniques. Okay, so in mindfulness technique, the physical aspect, if you want to do the most basic mindfulness technique, you have the person start to breathe. And that's the physical aspect. And you have them feel the air, feel their lungs, and breathe them out. The mental aspect of this technique is you have them count their breath. Okay. The soothing aspect of breathing in one, two is the emotional release when you do the breath. But in this, once the person's mind starts to drift from counting their breaths, you have them come back to counting. So that's one mindfulness technique. Another mindfulness technique is you have some type of object. Usually, in a lot of cases, it's a picture on a wall that is kind of abstract but very symmetrical and whatnot. And you, I think some people call them medullas or something like that. But you have them focus on that picture and focus on their breath and focus on their experiences with that picture. And again, in grounding techniques, once their mind starts to drift away from that picture, you encourage them to focus back. Okay. Other grounding techniques is you have them do what's called desensitization release. So you have them sit in a chair, you have them kind of get in a relaxed mode, and then you have them, for example, tighten the muscles in their feet and then release the muscles in their feet. And then you have them tighten their calf muscles and then loosen their calf muscles. And then you have them do their upper legs, and then you have them tighten their torso, loosen their torso, tighten the chest, loosen the chest, tighten the arms, loosen the arms, tighten the face, loosen the face. And when you do that, and it takes a little while to teach someone how to do that. Basically, what you're doing is you're taking all the tension from the bottom of the body and you're letting it build up, and you have them imagine once they do the face, you have them imagine all of their tension and emotional pain release out of the top of their head. Okay. And that's called something desensitization. I can't remember the exact name of it, but that's kind of one other type of grounding technique you can use. There's other simpler ones. Maybe I'll get some examples and put them on Canvas for you. Does that kind of answer your question though? Did I get close to what you
Yes, that
were?
all helps me better understand. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So then the next thing is then to get into how substances control you or when they do. Okay. Um, uh, uh, Usually when a person goes through a relapse, for example, they can't control their substance use. Okay. It starts to control them. And what this section does is helps them identify what situations in their life trigger substance to start controlling them. Okay. And in this the difficult part about this part is sometimes it will be emotional pain. It'll be being yelled at by their intimate partner, or it might be being rejected at work. It might be a memory, a triggered memory, or a night terror for someone with PTSD. But other times, it may be things that clients are totally unaware of. The biggest, for example, I worked with an individual who had some amazing daughters who weren't substance users. But anytime that the daughters came and visited the mother, the mother went through a relapse process. Even though, if you think about the unrelated nature of the given that the daughters didn't drink, they didn't party, they didn't do all of those things, just the presence of the daughters and stuff would drive the individual into going into a relapse. I've had other people who go through a relapse because they're making a certain type of a meal. And there's such a strong association between that meal and drinking or substance use that it leads to substance use. So the tricky part of this section is, of course, there's traumas that can lead to substance use. There's high risk situations that can lead to substance use, but part of this is also identifying those innocuous situations where substance abuse can sneak in and take over the individual. Okay. The next topic is then asking for help. This is one that um, um, I'll be honest, I always struggled with because it was very difficult. If you've ever known anyone who has PTSD or a substance use issue, asking for help is extremely, extremely hard. Even when we don't have PTSD or we don't have a substance use issues, people have a hard time asking for help. I think about how many times students in my classes don't reach out because they're afraid to ask me for some type of help or something like that. And we get to the end of the semester and I'm like, well, why didn't you ask me? Why didn't you get a hold of me? And they're like, well, I didn't want to bother you. And so just even in college classrooms and whatnot, we all have difficulties with asking for help. But the lesson being learned is that it's a way of healing, and to really find out that there are people who are actually interested in helping is an enlightening and healing process in of itself. Okay. And then I'm going to kind of go over some just really quickly some of these. So taking care of yourself, this gets into the self-care aspect. This is kind of the self-love, taking a caring for your, kind of builds off the self-care about having compassion and forgiveness for yourself. The red and green flags are signs of dangers and safety. And so this is red flags, green flags. It works very much off of the um, ego defense mechanisms kind of that we talked about at the first of the semester. Honesty, and helping the client to be really honest with themselves, let them know that it's okay to fail, it's okay to relapse, but being honest about it is the only way to recover from it. Recovery thinking, creating a new story, making it so that that their identity is not about the trauma. Their identity is not about being a substance abuser. Their identity goes well beyond that. That really the trauma that happened is a part of them. It is a part of their history, but that's all that it is. It's just a part. And in some cases, it may be something that may not even have a significant bearing on who the person wants to be as a human being. Okay. Integrating the split self, striving for integration. So a lot of individuals with PTSD feel like they live in two worlds. This one where they're supposed to be okay, healthy. It's kind of a mask they wear. And then there's this other person who is in chaos and scared and frightened. When we look at the substance abusers, there's the ones that hide their substance use and then give this better face to the rest of the world. And in this process, it's what we're trying to do is integrate and help the individual become a whole, complete individual. Um, but again, I will say this needs to begin with honesty and recovery thinking. You don't want to get into this phase unless you've done those two phases, because otherwise it's just going to end bad. All right, and I'll just go through these really quick. Commitment, making a commitment and having them understand what commitment is. Giving meaning, creating meaning, and meaning of healing and recovery. Again, going back to the case management, looking at community resources, setting help, and then we get into relationships, the relationship aspect of it, where we start to talk about healthy boundaries. We put the relationship part right here. If you notice, it's probably about midway through, because what we should have been doing effectively as the facilitator is modeling those healthy boundaries and helping group members understand what healthy boundaries are. And then when we get to the topic, we can say, well, look at what we do in this group. Look how we respect each other. Look how we interact, and kind of show them that they have that capability of setting boundaries, and it's okay. It turns out to be good. Okay. Discovery, to stay open to experiences and new knowledge, and then getting others to support you in your recovery. Coping with triggers, how to change people, place, and things. Respecting your own time to make recovery the highest priority. And then we get more into healthy relationships. So we start with boundaries, and then we start to discover what are healthy relationships. Again, when we look at substance users, usually their quote unquote healthy relationships in the beginning are those relationships that enable drinking or substance use behaviors. And those are the people that they feel like they have the closest attachment to. And so, first, starting by boundaries and helping them develop boundaries, by this point, they're really starting to hopefully develop an idea of what is a healthy relationship. That's someone who supports me, for example, in my recovery. It's someone who gives me empathy and support, those types of things. Okay. And then again, we hit on the safety notions with things like self nurturing, healing from anger, then life choice games focusing on constructive coping. So now we're starting to look at future things. So we kind of do this life choice games about what are we going to do from here. Okay. And then we go through termination in this process, which is the final. We help them develop an aftercare plan. We usually, from a group like this, we then have an optional process group they can go to, which they can continue to process things. These are usually done on a bi-weekly basis. It's not done weekly like this one is, but it allows them to kind of have a place to go to kind of continue to build their skills and their development. Okay. All right. Okay. So that is the seeking safety process, and I'm going to stop my screen sharing right now. So